Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 29th of January 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Well, it seems we've got a government of occupation, Mike, deceiving the public, but they're very worried about a free press. Why would that be?
Well,
I wonder.
Indeed, that is true. Now, if you remember back to 2018, Dame Frances Cairncross was asked to take a look at the sustainability of high-quality journalism. So here's what Matt Hancock had to say at the time. The Cairncross Review will explore whether intervention may be required to safeguard the future of our free and independent press. Debatable about that, the last couple of comments there. But anyway, so this was in March 2018. And the purpose of the review was to examine and make recommendations relating to the overall state of the UK news market, threats to financial sustainability of the UK news industry, the role and impact of digital search engines and social media platforms, and the role of digital advertising. Now, Hancock went on to say then, I tremble at the thought of a media regulated by the state in a time of malevolent forces in politics get this wrong, and I fear for the future of our liberal democracy. So that was all well and good. Dame Frances Cairncross, for her part, when she released the review, that was finally published a year ago in January 2019, the proposals I've put forward have the potential to improve the outlook for high-quality journalism. So keep that in mind. High-quality journalism, very important. And she went on to say they're designed to encourage new models to emerge. So then Matt Hancock's successor was Jeremy Wright. And when the Cairncross Review was published, he said a healthy democracy needs high-quality journalism. So lots of high-quality journalism needed to thrive. And this report sets out the challenges in putting our news media on a stronger and more sustainable footing in the face of changing technology and rising disinformation. Very important. Yesterday then, here is Nicky Morgan, who is the current Culture Secretary, and she said at the heart of any thriving democracy is a free and vibrant press. Its role in holding power to account and keeping the public informed of local, national, and international issues is vital, and yet in this country its future is under threat. She said only high-quality journalism can hold the powerful to account and shine a light on society's important issues in communities, in courtrooms, and in council chambers. And she said the stakes are high, and this response, so the government has now issued a response to the Cairncross Review, shows our commitment to getting it right so future generations can be inspired and engaged by a free and vibrant press. So the key words here are high quality journalism and a free and vibrant press. This is right the way through all the statements over the last 2 or 3 years and all the documentation.
Well, hello, we're back again. Apologies for that. We think that was a small bug in the technical system. It certainly wasn't coronavirus.
No, it wasn't coronavirus, but we'll come back to the start of this a little bit then. So here is the Cairncross Review, and we'll just remind ourselves what Dame Frances had to say at the time. So she called for new codes of conduct to rebalance the relationship between publishers and online platforms. The government has given that a big green tick, and they have said that they're working with interested parties to further assess this recommendation over the coming months and form a wider programme of work. It's going to involve the Competition and Markets Authority, and they're going to seek to set out the government's approach to competition policy and digital platform markets very, very soon. Then the second one was the Competition and Market Authority to investigate online advertising market to ensure fair competition. So the complaint here was that basically the mainstream media isn't getting enough money from online advertising, and of course that's because they're actually being there are proper counts being kept of how many times an advert is viewed, how many times it's clicked on, and that this business model doesn't work for the mainstream media. So this one gets a big green tick from the government, and they're saying that the CMA has published their interim report in December, and the government notes the range of potential interventions being explored, for example, measures to promote transparency and enhance data sharing. So I think perhaps the mainstream media feels that the advertising companies not being entirely transparent with the amount of money that should be paid, so they want more effectively. Now, online platforms' efforts to improve their users' news experience should be placed under regulatory supervision. This, of course, comes out of the Online Harms White Paper, so the government agrees with this one completely. That gets a nice big tick. So they're saying the platform's efforts to help users identify the reliability and trustworthiness of news sources will continue and expand as a result of the proposals in the Online Harms White Paper. Trustworthiness, extremely important, Brian. Okay, the next one then, developing a media literacy strategy alongside Ofcom, industry and stakeholders. Well, of course, everybody's illiterate with respect to the media. We can't work out the difference between true information, truth and disinformation. And so, of course, there needs to be some kind of intervention here. And so this gets a big green tick from the government because this is also a major part of the Online Harms White Paper, because otherwise you can't deal with all that nasty disinformation that's out there. So they're going to publish a strategy on this by the summer of this year. And then Ofcom should explore the market impact of BBC News and whether it inappropriately steps into areas better served by commercial news providers. The government's giving this one a big green tick too. And they're saying that the review, which was published in October 2019, looked specifically at the BBC's links to third-party news sites, and Ofcom have indicated that they may look at this further. So basically, a bit of unhappiness amongst the non-taxpayer-funded media channels, in the sense that the BBC only links to itself and doesn't link to any third parties. Now, what's this all about? Well, basically, of course, what the mainstream media is doing is laundering information in the same way that criminals launder money. So it's basically publishing information, and then everybody else links to that published information, which gives it more credibility, at least in the eyes of search engines and so on. So that has to be improved. And next, a new innovation fund should be launched, aiming to improve the supply of public interest news. That gets a big green tick from the government. And the government has worked with Nesta to develop a pilot innovation fund, which launched in October 2019. And they're going to evaluate this pilot to inform decisions on the full innovation fund. So that's bungs to the mainstream media for producing public interest news, which I presume means government propaganda. But anyway, we move on. Next of all, they say new forms of tax reliefs to encourage payments for online news content and support local and investigative journalism. Well, the government gives that a big green tick as well. And they're saying that they're certainly helping by through business rates relief and so on for local media outlets. And they say expanding financial support for local news by extending the BBC's local democracy reporting service. That gets a nice big green tick. So the BBC sponsored local democracy service, where they put BBC trained journalists into local media. This is going to be expanded. Brilliant stuff.
This is straight out of the Soviet, Mike.
Yes. And finally, a new independent institute should be created to ensure the future provision of public interest news. That unfortunately gets a red X. And the reason for that isn't that the government doesn't see the value of it. They absolutely do see the value of this. But basically, this is not for government to lead, is what they're saying. So they don't want to be leading this one. This is for somebody else to deal with. They support it in principle. So there you have it, Brian. This is the government response to the Cairn Cross review. Online harms, obviously a very significant part of this. Disinformation and countering disinformation in the government's eyes, a big part of this. In other words, making sure that the mainstream media maintains its monopoly and that social media and alternative media don't get a look in.
Don't get a look in, and that's reinforced with legislation. So regulatory supervision of online news. This is to make sure that nobody can challenge the government propaganda empire, whether it's through the BBC or approved commercial companies. Just jumping back to Matt Hancock there, Mike, interesting, he was talking about malevolent forces in politics. Now, for me, that means that we've got politicians not doing their job. We've got people involved in deceit on the public in Westminster. That's what I call malevolent, but I rather think that he's looking out through his window at organisations like the UK Column, and we're a pack of trouble because if we report accurately, we could we could lift the lid on what these government figures are doing.
Absolutely. That's what we aim to do anyway.
Certainly. Well, let's have a look at high quality journalism, and what better place to go than the BBC. Just took a little snapshot of their web page and to see how we were doing with the coronavirus scare story. Well, the death toll from China virus outbreak passes 100. And of course, we've got the little children in their masks, because that's always emotive. But let's have a look at how this high quality BBC reporting works. We picked up on this particular one, coronavirus. How worried should we be? Interesting picture there, Mike, because on the right-hand side there might be a little bit of glare from the position of the light, but I think we can definitely see quite a lot of smog, and the massive scale of pollution in this area the BBC is not commenting on. But of course this is giving rise to a lot of the lung health problems, which are compounding the effect of the virus, but the BBC doesn't want to tackle that. So in the article we picked out this. Officials in China have confirmed the cases are caused by coronavirus. Well, that's jolly good. They're a broad family, but but only 6 are known to infect people. Severe acute respiratory syndrome (SARS), which is caused by a coronavirus. Having problems here. Killed 774 of the 8,098 people infected in the outbreak that started in China in 2002. And then we get a quote from a Dr. Josie Golding. We'll come on to her in a second. Now, please check the mathematics here, because it's easy to make a mistake. But in 2002, the population of China was roughly 1.28 billion. So 774 SARS death equate to a 0 point, and I think that's 6 zeros and a 6. I suggest people check it, but the point we're making here is that despite all of the hype over the dangers of what's going on here and SARS, if you look at it against the Chinese population of healthy people, this is complete nonsense.
In the what is the virus section, did they mention that of the 6, that includes the common cold and the flu?
Not that I read, but I may possibly have missed that in my haste to identify facts in a BBC article. There was a little bit of a depressing task. And this I found from a Lancet report, where it said that China recorded 262,000 road deaths in 2017. Now, they're talking about roughly 14 people per 100,000 of the population, so somebody else is going to have to do the maths on that. But that was the quote. Was that for a year, or was it a number of years leading up to 2017? I don't know. But clearly the relationship between SARS or coronavirus deaths and the dangers on China's roads requires some examination. Well, here's the lady who provided the quote. There's a strong memory of SARS. That's where a lot of fear comes from, but we're a lot more prepared to deal with these sorts of diseases. So this statement to me didn't have a lot of sense at all. And let's remind ourselves that if only 774 people, tragic as that is, but it's a very, very small number, died, who's actually ramping up the fear? And I've got to say, I think it might be Dr. Golding herself. Whether she's mature enough to know what she's doing, I don't know. But if you want to find out about her, have a look on the internet and do your own research. This is a report I found where she'd been working at a World Veterinary Vaccine Congress. So you haven't got to go far when you find that the main drive is vaccinations. I did have a look at her Twitter page and was shocked, because this is how she sees herself, as a sort of cartoon character.
A Muppet.
A Muppet, basically. Thank you, Mike. So is she just immature? Is this another sort of slightly older Greta Thunberg, who is apparently advising the world on the dangers of common cold and flu viruses and similar? I don't know, but it's worrying. But more important is the Wellcome Trust. So let's just have a little look. And we find that, first of all, the chair is Eliza Manningham Butler. Don't know whether you would remember that name at all, Mike, but of course we should do, because this is the former head of MI5. But she's apparently also medically qualified and is now working with the Wellcome Trust. And I'm just giving you a snapshot of the type of people involved here, because basically there's quite a few of them. Do look for yourselves. And what you will find is a very interesting mixture of people, because we've not only got security services, as we'll see with this lady, we've got a person who's been connected with investment banking. She's also been there with the Guardian Media Group and the Court of the Bank of England, and of course the London Business School. So this is all good. We have to have, of course, our virus experts, and Professor Brian Grenfell here is obviously one of the top, very deep professional expert in viruses. And then we've got Scylla Snowball, who caught my attention, and her background is in sort of advertising and charities, but she's also worked for the Department for International Trade. Now remember, of course, that this organisation is independent, Mike. This is always important that we remember these sorts of things. So I'm just going to summarise it. They've got a budget of 26.8 billion. You've got a mix of top-level British intelligence officers, banking interests, big pharma and the media. And I'm just asking gently, what could possibly go wrong?
Can't think of it. Yeah.
No. Well, we went in a slightly different direction here, because it seems that open society often comes up alongside the Wellcome Trust. And if you do a search of their website, it came up with 60 results. Wasn't able to look at them all, but this first one is interesting, because here it shows that the Wellcome Trust is working with the World Health Organization on the Sustainable Development Goals. So this,
and climate change.
And climate change. So the Wellcome Trust, with that 26 billion, is into deep global politics. And so how does the disease and the vaccination part fit into that? Well, here he is, George Soros, of course, the man who runs Open Society. And this is a Times article. I can't quite read the date, 2017. It was talking about him putting billions more, 13.6 billion, to his Open Society charity foundations. And obviously that money is pumped on to a number of different organisations looking to change the world and change our lives. But we had an article here in The Independent where it said that at the time that George Soros made a fortune in UK, that was the so-called Black Wednesday on the markets, 1994 I've got here. It's also pointing out that the founder of the chairman of the Wellcome Trust had also been investing a huge amount of money and made a killing as well. So Wellcome Trust, what is it actually doing? We can't find out, but the BBC is certainly not reporting any of this, Mike. So back to the article, how worried should we be? Are there any vaccines or treatments? Well, it says quite clearly no. But if we go further in the article where it says how can the virus be stopped, it's talking about what's happening. There's also no vaccine to give people immunity to the virus. The only option is to prevent people who've become infected from spreading the virus to others. That means, and then it says, limiting people's movement, encouraging hand washing. It's jolly good, isn't it? Get all those 1.4 billion Chinese washing their hands. And then it says treating patients in isolation with healthcare workers wearing protective gear. Now, I'm puzzled about this, Mike, because if there's no treatment, how are they treating them?
Well, that's a good question.
It is a good question. We'll come on to that in a minute. Let's look at how the BBC ramps up the fear. This is a section, how deadly is it? More than 100 people are known to have died from the virus, but while the ratio of deaths to known cases appears low, the figures are unreliable. So there's a nice cocktail of words there, but the 100 compared to Chinese population, of course, is minute. but it might appear large to an audience in UK. So this is disingenuous reporting. Then we've got, but the figures are unreliable. The ratio of deaths to cases is low for healthy people. The BBC doesn't stress this. If you're healthy, this is something that is not going to bother you. It could cause you problems for a while, but all the deaths are in weak and elderly people and people with lung problems.
And again, we're not by any means downplaying the tragedy of the people, the individuals who have died. This is about the way this is being reported.
Indeed. So unreliable figures, you throw that onto the end of this sentence because that's vagueness, so the fear then breeds. But the infection seems to take a while to kill, so more of these patients may yet die. Well, you've got seems and you've got may, so this is not certainty, this is all guess by the BBC, but it's being used to cloud the fact that the risk and likelihood of dying from this is very low. And then it's unclear how many unreported cases there are. So you've got a lack of facts.
This would be unknown unknowns, would it?
Yeah, this is unknown unknowns. This is crass. I can't think of a better word to describe it. So here's the article, and just to emphasize, this is another section where it says the coronavirus causes severe acute respiratory infection and there's no specific cure or vaccine. It doesn't say, but if you're healthy, you shouldn't be worried. And let's have a look. So there's no global epidemic, nor was there for SARS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome and HRV. We were all going to die in hundreds of millions. It never happened. A tiny number of elderly and infirm are at risk, of which a few may die. That is tragic, as you say. Healthy people recover on their own. There's no treatment anyway, so the vaccines aren't needed. And the BBC clearly pushing the agenda for mass forced vaccination on the back of a created coronavirus scare. So just bring this in. Here's the journalist, James Gallagher. I did take the opportunity to go onto his Twitter page and ask him how there was a treatment when there was no treatment. I don't know whether he's replied yet, but this is an article designed to cause an alarm and distress. And I think we also have to ask, is this actually fake news, Mike? What's the good news? Well, the good news is people waking up to it. So I've just taken a section from an email that I was sent by a gentleman called Norman. He said you should have a look at this piece from the BBC back in the 1970s because they almost seem to be predicting what they're reporting today. But if that's a bit of guesswork, this one isn't. Event 201, the John Hopkins Centre for Health Security in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise on October 18, 2019 in New York. The exercise illustrated areas where public-private partnerships, that's interesting, isn't it, will be necessary during the response to a severe pandemic in order to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences.
It's almost like they're using these types of events as excuses to pursue a global political agenda rather than really worrying about anybody's health.
That's what it seems to me. The clue there is the public-private partnership. So we're going to put a question mark over this, but of course BBC reports none of this.
Yes. Okay. Now, if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, your support is much needed and much appreciated. Head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are options for helping us out there. And as I say, that would be much appreciated. Now, good news, Brian. The historic Brexit vote is taking place in the European Parliament today. They are going to approve the terms of Brexit. 751 representatives in the Parliament, not including the UK representatives because they're no longer MEPs, apparently, is going to debate the withdrawal agreement, and then it's going to be voted on, and the vote is a done deal, apparently. And then we're going to leave at 11 o'clock on the 31st of January, which is Friday, so this is all fantastic. So we are going to leave. That undoubtedly will please the fishing industry, except there's going to be no change. So this is another policy area where there will be no change. The Marine Management Organisation is reminding the fishing industry that the UK will continue to abide by the current rules which apply to all UK, EU and other vessels fishing in UK waters throughout the transition period, which lasts at least until the 31st of December this year, but probably lasts longer than that. The regulations are designed to keep fish stocks at sustainable levels and protect the marine environment and support the viability of fishing businesses now and in the future, apparently.
Well, I can tell you that's an absolute lie, Mike. Those regulations are there to regulate the markets and the quantity of fish that can be landed, and anything to do with protection of the stocks and the environment was very much secondary.
But you don't need to worry. Because the Fisheries Bill is being introduced to Parliament today, and this creates powers to ensure a profitable future for UK fishing industry with a fairer share of fishing opportunities.
Okay.
That means that they are going to create powers for the UK to operate as an independent coastal state and manage its fish stock sustainably outside the EU, and that's being introduced to Parliament today, as I say. But in fact, if you read on through the press release, you start to get a clue. They say that while the bill ends the current automatic rights for EU vessels to fish British waters, in future access to fish in UK waters will be a matter for the UK to negotiate, and we will decide on the rules that foreign vessels must follow.
We must have a whole section of news on this, Mike, and we can get back to my time in the Royal Navy, where unfortunately I did some fishery protection and watched the European rules being used to destroy our fishing industry firsthand. A tragic period in my life.
Absolutely. So anybody is in any doubt that this is Brexit without the exit, you've got to understand that the rules stay as they are until the end of the transition period, and by the end of the transition period we will have a whole new set of rules that we have to abide by.
To work in partnership with the organisation we left.
Absolutely. As well as powers to implement new deals negotiated with the EU and other coastal states, set quotas, fishing opportunities and days at sea, this new bill includes new measures for devolved governments and single set of UK-wide fisheries objectives to ensure that fish stocks and the marine environment are better protected. So what we're going to find, the fishing industry is largely hoping that Brexit is going to relax rules on what they can land. I'm going to suggest that is going to be exactly the opposite case. And if we see what happening to fisheries, the same type of rhetoric that we're seeing around farming, absolutely the sustainability agenda is going to be first and foremost. And that means basically cutting down even further from where we are at the moment. But we don't need to worry because Boris, who was putting this out on Twitter today, this unbelievable video where he was tearing strips off a piece of card and answering the questions that were underneath. He is going to be addressing the nation at 10 p.m. on Friday. So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm sure I'm going to be inspired by it.
He should be the one who has the Muppet on his Twitter page, Mike, shouldn't he, really?
Well, indeed. Now, good news. The railways are going to be given £500 million, apparently to restore our railways or not. So £500 million. It was Grant Shapps who was visiting Fleetwood and Poulton Le Fylde yesterday. Now these lines were closed, or this line was closed in 1970 as part of the beaching cuts. The government has now said they're going to give £500 million into restoring the railways, reversing the beaching cuts, apparently. Well, this isn't really enough money, but what are they actually going to be spending it on? Well, £1.5 million is going to go to the Ashington Blythe Tyne line in Northumberland to reopen that. That's going to make a huge difference. £100,000 to the Fleetwood line in Lancashire, which is the one he was visiting. The £500 million is actually going to develop proposals for what might happen in the future or not. So I'm afraid that's why we've put a line through restoring the railways. Now, if anybody wants to know what beaching was up to, you can have a look at Network Rail, where they have a photograph with Beeching standing in front of his map showing, well, that's actually phase 2 of the Beeching proposals. So this was after they got rid of all the branch lines that basically cut off a lot of the towns and
Yeah.
cities in the country, and they were going to then close a lot of the main lines as well. Now that second part didn't happen, but they were going to close most of the main lines and then focus on, I think it was 16 or 18 main lines in the future.
Yeah, this can be simply likened to a river system, a drainage system, that if you keep cutting off all the small streams that feed the river, you don't have a river anymore. And that, of course, is what happened as a result of the beaching cuts. But we've had massive house building over many of those lines that were dismantled. So even though in theory most of the track can be there, you end up that you've got massive development over these prime routes of communication. I think this is a scam, personally, but
well, as I say,
that
£500 million isn't going into laying a single foot of track. That is going into
talking about
developing proposals. So it's going to go into the friends of the Tory party that are running consultancy firms, it seems.
Okay, well, if that's good news, I'm afraid we have to come back to a bit of bad news, and that is that dissatisfaction with democracy is at a record high. It's taken a bit of a study to work this out, Mike, because of course we know that our MPs are simply a law unto themselves and are not following what the voters want them to do. But here's the headline. So democracy's breaking down. And they say that democracy within developed countries is dissatisfaction with democracy within developed countries is at its highest level in almost 25 years. Now, don't worry, because this, of course, has come from independent University of Cambridge researchers. So these academics have analysed what they say is the biggest global data set. They mean a database when they say that, don't they?
Yes.
Data set is a nice way of saying we've been running a vast database on attitudes towards democracy based on 4 million people in 3,500 surveys. The UK and the United States have a particularly high level of discontent, so I'm sure they're happy with that. Well, who's the key man from this article? It's this one. It's Dr. Roberta Foer. And what's he got to say? Well, words of wisdom. Across the globe, democracy is in a state of malaise. We find that dissatisfaction with democracy has risen over time and is reaching an all-time global high, in particular in developed countries. So he's smiling at the thought of more consultancy because it's all breaking down. Therefore, he's going to be needed. Do have a look. Here's a bit of his CV. So he's working all over the place. The University of Oxford. He's been involved with Harvard University, and this just caught my eye, which was the Electoral Integrity Project. I always like seeing the word integrity because we know we can trust what's happening. Well, here's the project, the Electoral Integrity Project, and if we bring in a bit of a detail, it's independent academic project based at Harvard University and the University of Sydney. The EIP project is directed by the founding director, Pippa Norris. We'll have a look at Miss Norris in a minute. And it's been generously funded by many foundations and partners. And what are they going to do? Well, when do elections meet international standards of electoral integrity? What happens when elections fail to do so? And what can be done to mitigate these problems?
Good.
So that's all good. Let's have a look at the partners. Well, so many people, so many different interests, but this one caught my eye, which is Open Society. So I think we know where some of the major funding will be coming from. But here she is. This is Pippa Norris. She's certainly independent because she's worked at the UN, UNESCO, NDI, the Council of Europe, International IDEA, the OSCE and the World Bank, as you do, Mike.
And the National Endowment for Democracy, so that's effectively the US government, and the UK Electoral Commission.
Yeah, but she's produced a massive number of books. She's doing all this work, but it's all to protect our democracy and make sure that our vote counts, Mike.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
So what was this one, the International IDEA? I just had a quick look. Here it is. Basically, It's an Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. It's an intergovernmental organisation that supports sustainable democracy worldwide. Sustainable.
Good.
But if you look at their founding document here, this is a statement, a declaration made in 1995. Interestingly, it says that the concept of democracy is that it grows from within and from below rather than being imposed from the top. But it's very weak, and each generation has got to look after it. So their own statement says it's not sustainable, but now it's going to be sustainable, and these independent people are going to help us achieve that. Personally, I don't trust it.
Yes. So the question is, who is this organ? I mean, why was this published now? And well, it's quite interesting because the reason is that this organisation at Cambridge University is being launched today. This is the Centre for the Future of Democracy. And they said democracy as an idea and practice generates a lot of heat. The news cycle is filled with reminders of the dangers apparently bearing down on democratic politics, low voter turnout, media bias, populism, the rhetorical or practical subversion of democratic norms and institutions. And they're going to say these suspicions and fears may be justified or they may not, but the only way to find out and the best way to start thinking about how democracy might flourish in the future is to understand the long-term structural conditions that give rise to democratic life, its institutions and practices, successes and failures. That is what the Centre for the Future of Democracy intends to do. So as I say, this organisation being launched today at Cambridge University. So they apparently are going to initially focus on 3 strands of research. I'm going to focus on the first one. Here it is, democracy and climate change. In conjunction with the work being done by Cambridge Zero and the Centre for Science and Policy, we will be exploring how different forms of democracy can engage with the politics of climate change. The particular focus of this project is on the relationship between technical problem solving, including geoengineering, and deliberative democracy. Can expert science and democratic engagement mix? Now, the question is, what is deliberative democracy? Well, if we go to Wikipedia, I don't use that as a source terribly often, but we've gone to that today. A form of democracy, so deliberative democracy is a form of democracy in which deliberation is central to decision making. It adopts elements of both consensus decision making and majority rule. Deliberative democracy offers deliberative democracy differs from traditional democratic theory in that authentic deliberation, not mere voting, is the primary source of legitimacy for the law. While deliberative democracy is generally seen as some form of an amalgam of representative democracy and direct democracy, and so it goes on. So it's generally seen as some form of amalgam of representative democracy and direct democracy. And of course, this is exactly what is being proposed by the Extinction Rebellion with citizens' assemblies. So here we have a change in how we're governed being linked to the climate change issue. That's being promoted by Extinction Rebellion. Now it's being promoted by the Centre for the Future of Democracy at Cambridge University, and of course the same thing being promoted by Keir Starmer, who is the likely next leader of the Labour Party, who said at the weekend, we need to empower people to have a real say in the workplace and the communities they're part of and over the public services they use. Now, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would have expected that in a democracy, a representative democracy, which is supposedly what we've got at the moment, we elect our representatives, and those representatives would deliberate on the policy that they're going to pursue and deliberate on the implementation of that policy. You would expect some kind of deliberation, would you not?
I think I would, yeah.
So clearly this is not the model of deliberative democracy. I'm having trouble with that today. Yes, that the Centre for Future Democracy intends to pursue. This is another organisation which is going to pursue this sortition-style model of.
So, without any consultation with the public whatsoever, behind the scenes, a whole new model of society is being put together, which is being done in a very deceitful way. So these people in their actions, I have to stick on deceitful. They know what they're doing, Who's controlling them? The average politician hasn't got the brain power to come up with these schemes. So we've got to be looking at these Soros and other hedge fund backed think tanks to come up with this agenda.
Right, absolutely. And of course, it all comes down to, if we're thinking about some kind of deliberative democracy and some kind of jury type system in order to come to decisions about how we govern ourselves, of course, that's on the basis that the jury, the Citizens' Assembly, is given all the information that they need in order to make a decision. If you have a controlled press, if we bring ourselves right back to the beginning of this program once again, if we have a controlled press or a government-funded press or a government-supported press, which is allowed to run a monopoly of information, then that becomes a very difficult situation to have people making decisions on limited information.
Limited and controlled information.
Absolutely.
Delphi technique. We better end there, but what are we seeing? We're seeing a rapid movement to close down in the United Kingdom. Free speech is being taken out and our system of constitution and law taken apart, and it's being replaced by something nobody has been consulted on. How do we stop it? Speak out, get writing those letters, and start holding your MPs to account. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Back at the same time on Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.